Hi, this is Mr. McConley and this is BKW Intro to Agriculture. And today we're getting ready to bale, and so we have to do some maintenance, things that we always do in preparation and to keep the machine running well. This is an old baler, works well, but in order to keep something going for a long time, you really have to maintain it. So things like grease, a grease gun and a tube of grease is not expensive. And that $5 you might spend on the grease can save you hundreds or more in other parts that you have to replace. But before I get to the grease, since I'm right here at the twine box, and I want to show you how to put twine into a square baler. So twine, first of all, comes in a variety of different strengths. This is 7200. Which is a heavier or thicker twine. My knotter on the baler likes that heavier twine because it's an older baler, like I said, and the knotter's kind of worn, and when the knotter gets worn, then the heavier twine allows it, even though parts are a little loose, it allows it to continue to knot correctly. So this bale, it's called a bale of twine. This bale of twine here is working from the inside out, and when it gets to the end, which is, we don't have that much left, this is the end of the rope right here. So this is the very end of that one, and we want to connect it to the middle of the next one, so when it finishes this one, it'll automatically spool over to the next one. Now the key is here, first of all, clean up your ends. And they also, they give you a little tag. Pull from this end, so if you get confused, there it is. Now, so I want to hook these together, and I want to do what's called a square knot. So you go behind, around like that, and then in front, around like that. It's just two crisscrosses, but they're in opposite directions. And then, once you're satisfied that you got your knot, you want to pull that thing as hard as you can, because this knot has to pass through all these small openings, and it has to pass through the parts of the knotter, and then you don't want any extra stuff hanging off that might get caught, so you trim it tight, and that's that. But you also don't want this to get tangled, so we're going to tuck the excess down in here, and we're going to tuck this excess down like this. So now it's kind of neat. It should spool right out and switch over to this bale seamlessly. At least that's what I hope. Most of the time it works. All right, let's move on to the chains. So if you break these are different timing chains. So this chain allows the pickup head. The pickup head is going around and around and picking the hay up. And this chain connects the timing of the pickup head to the timing of the stuff going back and forth. And I'll show you that in a minute. There's stuff that picks up. Well, no, there's all the stuff on top. So I'll actually duck down. I know you can see it. See back in there, those silver fingers that are down? Those silver fingers go back and forth, and they pull the hay into the chamber, and it has to be timed perfectly so that nothing hits. And so this is one of the timing chains. So if this timing chain breaks, you're done for the day. You can't let that happen. So in order to prevent that, we're going to use some chain lube here that will lengthen the life of the chain. We spray it on all the chain parts here. All right. Now, if we go to the other side, we can take a look at some other chains. So on this side here, there's more chains. So this chain times everything that's happening with the pickup head to everything that's happening with the plunger. The plunger is the thing going back and forth, compacting the hay. We got this chain here, which times the plunger to the knotter. So everything has to be timed perfectly, and all these parts have to work without hitting each other. So I will spend a lot more time lubricating those in a minute. But moving on to the next thing I wanted to show you. Grease fittings. Like I said, grease fittings are very important, and there's a lot of grease fittings on an old baler like this. So what I do is every time I go to use this thing, I start pumping grease into all these grease fittings until it starts shooting back out, because what that does is you're putting the grease in and it's pushing the old grease out, and the old grease might have dirt or dust on it. And so I'm just cleaning up the attachment points. So you're cleaning out what was the old dirty and dusty grease, because let's face it, baling is a dusty operation, and there's going to be a lot of dust getting into the mechanisms here. So this is a way to push all that out, and you're probably getting the idea already that these balers have a lot of grease fittings. I'm just trying to, here, I'm just gonna get my rag for a second. I'm getting a build up here. So let's move to these here, and then these, we'll do these. So we got, boom. Most of the time, since I grease this basically every time I use it, I don't have to add much grease. Just pumping a little bit. This thing's been sitting all winter, so it just needs that fresh grease in it. So I think there's two more here on the knotter, here and here. I wish I could show you the knotter in action, but it's kind of like a whole video in and of itself, just showing you the knotter. It's very confusing the way it works. But just to give you a kind of a basic, so the strings come out of the box here. They go down here, and they run through this thing, which is a part of the knotter assembly. It moves back and forth on a pivot, and it's got needles, they call them, and the strings go right through the middle of the needle. These needles come up, and the needles actually poke up through right here. They come right up through this opening down in here, which you may or may not be able to see. That's okay. But when they come up, that in essence is wrapping the string around a bale of hay. Okay, so now the string has been wrapped around the bale of hay because it came up from behind through the needles. And then these knotters have to take that string, they grab it, they twist it around, they double it over, they flip it, and they tie it in a knot, and then cut the extra string off. This has to happen fast. If you watch a baler in full speed, you're baling along, and all of a sudden it goes shoo, 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 like that, and in about one Mississippi, it has tied a knot around that bale, and it starts the process of wrapping the string around the next bale. It's pretty amazing, and someone figured this out years and years ago. This design has been around basically since the invention of these balers. And so it's at this point, 60 plus years old that these knotters have been used, and they haven't really, if you look at a new one, it's almost the identical design, and it's just covered up and fancier, but the internal parts are the same. So some other spots, there's a lot more grease fittings here, but I'm going to skip over them right now. Don't need to see me do every grease fitting, but some of the other important areas that you really want to check out are underneath here. And underneath here, this thing is the plunger. And I'll move the flywheel by hand here. And you can watch the flywheel's out front here. And you can watch that plunger, see it start to move? All right, so that plunger moves back and forth And it's the part of the baler that's responsible for compacting all the hay. So it's very important that to keep these grease fittings on the plunger greased up. All right. So that's the plunger. And the plunger, of course, has to be in time with everything else, because if the plunger were to go back as the needles were coming up, remember those needles I talked about? The plunger would actually cut off the top of the needles, which does happen sometimes if your timing chain goes bad. It happened to my friend's baler last summer. Quite a mess. Now the PTO, we had a video earlier about PTOs, and the PTO, the tractor would be here, and this would hook into the PTO. Now this part of the PTO, the extension of the PTO shaft as it goes back and it powers this baler, again, is a really important piece. These are universal joints so that this doesn't have to be a straight line, but they're under a lot of stress as you turn corners. These universal joints are spinning at 540 revolutions per minute, and they're twisting at all these weird angles. So you can see that these have grease fittings, and these are really important to remain greased, and especially because this part of the baler actually is out past the roof of the barn. So this gets snowed on and rained on, so I want to make sure that this really gets lubricated very well. So there's other things I check. I check for any loose parts. So I always put my hands on things and I grab things and I wiggle them and I try to see if anything is loose. I check for tension on the chain, and they shouldn't be super tight, but they shouldn't be super loose and slapping either. So I check for that. I look at these belts here, and I'm looking to see if they're cracked. I've just recently replaced these, so they're looking good, but I'm looking to see if they're cracked and have any issues where they might break, because this is the kicker, and if those belts aren't working, the bale's not going to kick out. It's just going to sit there and you're done baling for the day. I also look at these things, the belts that actually kick the bale out. So these are spinning very fast and the bale comes shooting out between here, out this opening. And I'm looking to see that these are centered, because what can happen, these are all adjustable, and if one of them, if the adjustment moves, the belt will actually start walking sideways, kind of like if you own a snowmobile and you don't have your track adjusted correctly and the track kind of moves sideways because it's out of adjustment. I'm looking for that on these two also. So after I look for, another thing I look for is where it hooks to the wagon. There's an incredible amount of weight on this. So the tractor's pulling the baler. The baler is hooked to a wagon. The wagon might have, let's say, 150 bales at 40 pounds or 50 pounds each. You add that up, you have thousands of pounds, 5,000 pounds of weight. And all that weight is all pivoting on this when you're on a hill. So you got to make sure that this thing's in really good condition. You're looking for cracks. I've recently replaced some bolts that looked like they were just getting worn over time. So I'm checking for all that. Now, since this is the first time I'm baling this season, this is the pressure, the down pressure on the bale. It helps you determine how tight the bale is. In other words, how densely packed. If you tighten these more, then it's going to be harder for the plunger to push the baler out, and the bale will be heavier. If you loosen them, the bale will be lighter. But when you go to get started here, and this bale's been sitting here all winter, a nasty looking thing, then you want to loosen this up so that that bale will slide out easily and smoothly on the first attempt. You don't want it to get jammed up in there, and so you would loosen those, which would allow the bale to kick out. I also check, we don't have to go around and look, but I check to see that the counter is back to 0. The counter's down here. and the counter is just how we keep track of how many bales. So I make sure that that's zeroed so that we're starting from zero and we know how many bales. So all this maintenance might seem a little tedious, but it really saves you a lot of time and money and frustration. So for today, this is Mr. McConley, and this has been Maintaining Our Equipment.